The emergency exit sign above the auditorium door hummed green like it knew a secret no one else had survived long enough to learn. That was the first thing I noticed when I opened my eyes again. Not the exam packet in my lap, not the sweat under my collar, not the thunder of 200 students rising at once when the first bell rang, but that little plastic sign glowing over the back exit with one dead insect trapped inside it. In my first life, I had ignored that door. Everyone had. We were told the front corridor was the only authorized route from the morning briefing to the practical assessment hall, and at St. Aurelia Institute, rules were not instructions so much as religion. Break one, and the proctors wrote your name down like they were engraving a headstone. So the first time around, I had followed the crowd through the main doors after the bell, walking behind Seraphine Vale, the golden girl of our year, while she smiled over her shoulder and said, "Stay close, Alara. I know where we're going." I had stayed close. I had followed her white ribbon, her perfect posture, her confident steps through the glass corridor and into Hall D, where the sign on the door said Advanced Civil Procedure Practical. Then the doors locked, the second bell rang, and the chief examiner announced that every candidate in Hall D was sitting the wrong assessment. By noon, my score was voided. By Friday, Seraphine was on the merit list, and I was under investigation for attempting to sit a paper I was not assigned. By winter, my scholarship was gone. My father was apologizing to relatives for raising a disgrace, and Seraphine was standing under golden lights at the founder's banquet, accepting the place that should have been mine. Years later, when I died in a rented room with rejection letters stacked in a shoebox under my bed, I still remembered the back exit sign. I remembered wondering, with a bitterness that had become almost peaceful by then, whether the door had been unlocked. This time, I did not wonder. The briefing hall was exactly the same as it had been in my ruined life. Rows of polished wooden seats, a stage too wide for one nervous administrator, banners hanging from the ceiling with slogans about integrity and honor, and a sea of candidates pretending not to tremble. The morning briefing had just ended. The first bell had rung. Everyone was standing, gathering admission cards, smoothing blazer sleeves, reaching for lucky pens, whispering prayers into their palms. At the front, Deputy Registrar Helwick repeated the route into his microphone, his voice flat and important. Candidates assigned to the applied law simulation must proceed through the main corridor only. Do not use side exits. Do not stop. Do not enter any room unless directed by a floor marshal. The same speech. The same rhythm, the same tiny cough before floor marshal. In my first life, I had treated those words like a map. Now, they sounded like bait. I lowered my eyes to my admission slip and read the line I had memorized in another lifetime. Candidate 1187, Alara Wynn, Simulation Group C, Hall C2, second floor annex. Not Hall D. Never Hall D. The Institute had changed the assigned halls after the briefing because a leak had been discovered in the main corridor display boards. Candidates were supposed to be redirected by marshals in the side stairwell, but Seraphine had intercepted the message before it reached us. That was why she had led everyone confidently to Hall D the first time. It was not a mistake. It was a theft dressed as leadership. She had known the Real Hall changed, and she had known I would follow her, because all year she had trained everyone to think my caution was weakness, and her certainty was truth. Lost already? Seraphine's voice slid beside me like silk over a knife. She stood one row above me, white ribbon tied around her glossy black ponytail, gold merit pin on her lapel, lips curved in the kind of smile teachers trusted because it showed just enough teeth to look bright instead of hungry. Around us, students began streaming toward the front doors. But Seraphine did not move. She watched me the way a cat watches a cup balanced near the edge of a table. "You look pale, Alara. Don't worry. You can walk with me." I checked the routing chart before they covered it. Hall D is where the serious candidates are going. My fingers tightened around my admission slip, not because I was afraid, but because the memory of believing her still humiliated me. In my first life, I had thanked her. I had followed her like a rescued child while she walked me into the wrong hall and then told the investigation committee I had insisted on going there first. Now I folded the slip once, carefully, and tucked it into the inside pocket of my blazer. That's kind of you, I said, making my voice soft enough for the girls behind us to hear. But I think I need a minute. Seraphine's smile sharpened. A minute? The second bell is in 7 minutes. Then I should not waste yours, I said, and stepped sideways into the aisle, away from the river of students flowing toward the front. The funny thing about crowds is that they do not need chains if they already have a leader. The class moved after Seraphine without thinking. I heard Nella ask, "Are we sure it's Hall D?" And Joran answer, "Seraphine knows. She always knows." Someone laughed nervously. Someone said the main corridor would be packed. Someone else said the side stairs were for staff only. I watched Seraphine let those words build around her like a throne. She did not have to command them. She simply waited until the room arranged itself behind her. Then she turned her head slightly toward me. "Alara, you'll be marked late if you wander." The concern in her voice was flawless. If I had not heard the same concern in a disciplinary hearing while she handed over the forged witness statement that destroyed me, I might have admired the performance. "I know," I said. "Good luck." That stopped her. Not my refusal, not my calm, but the blessing. In our world, good luck was what weak students said to the strong. It was what candidates outside the top 10 said when they had already accepted they were background characters in someone else's victory. Her eyes narrowed for less than a second, then smoothed. "You too," she said. "Try not to panic." She swept toward the main doors, and half the cohort followed. But she did not look away from me for long. I felt her attention flick back once, twice, 3 times, like a hook testing whether the fish was still on the line. The back exit was behind the stage curtain, half hidden by a rolling notice board that said, "Quiet please, assessments in progress." I moved slowly, as if indecision had made my limbs heavy. That mattered. Seraphine believed hesitation was my natural state. If I suddenly marched like a woman with a plan, she would smell danger. So I let my shoulders curve. I glanced once toward the front doors. I bit my lip. I took 3 steps, stopped, unfolded my admission slip, and pretended to read it again. Behind me, the last students were leaving, but not all of them. I heard the soft paws of expensive shoes near the center aisle. Seraphine had not left. Of course she had not. In my first life, after the investigation, I had spent years replaying every detail and finally understood the cruelty of it. She had needed me to enter the wrong hall first, or close enough to first, so she could claim she was following my confusion. That was how she turned leadership into victimhood. If everyone went wrong, no one person was guilty. But if Alara Wynn, the scholarship girl with no family power, appeared to guide them wrong, then the institution needed someone to blame. This time, I let her think she still had that option. I slipped behind the notice board and pressed my palm to the emergency bar. The door opened with a sigh so soft it felt like a secret agreeing to be told. The corridor beyond the back exit was colder than the auditorium, lit by narrow windows and the gray glow of a storm gathering over the city. It smelled of floor polish, old paper, and rain trapped in the walls. A yellow sign pointed left toward staff archives and right toward annex stairs. In my first life, I had never seen this corridor, but after losing everything, I had made a hobby out of knowing places I had been forbidden to enter. I had filed information requests, read old campus maps, studied fire escape diagrams, even befriended a retired janitor who liked talking to lonely strangers at the public library. That back exit was not forbidden during emergency rerouting. It was the designated alternate path whenever the main corridor displays were compromised. The institute did not announce that publicly because students abused shortcuts, but the rule existed in the candidate handbook, page 42, footnote 3, written in language, so dry it might have been designed to be ignored. I turned right, toward the annex stairs, and counted my steps. 16 to the cracked tile, 9 to the security camera, 14 to the blind corner. At the corner I slowed. A reflection shivered in the dark glass of a trophy case behind me. White ribbon, gold pin, perfect posture. Seraphine had followed. For one breath, anger rose so hot inside me that the corridor blurred. She was still doing it. Even after time itself had cracked open and given me one more chance, Seraphine Vale was still walking behind me with my destruction tucked behind her smile. but rage had ruined me once. In my first life, after the hearing, I had shouted. I had begged. I had slammed my hands on the committee table and demanded they check the cameras, check the route, check the marshals, check anything that would prove I had not led anyone anywhere. They called me unstable. They called Seraphine composed. I learned too late that truth spoken in panic sounds like guilt to people who already chose their villain. So now I breathed through my nose, kept walking, and let the corridor camera record Seraphine tailing me without permission. The annex stairs were ahead, but just before them was a door with a blue placard. Hall E Practice Suite. In my old life, Hall E had been unused. This year, because time had reset to the same morning, it was being used for a decoy orientation drill for junior volunteers. The door would be unlocked. The room beyond it looked exactly like an assessment hall from the doorway. Desks, envelopes, proctor table, wall clock. But the papers inside were not ours. They were sample packets stamped void in ultraviolet ink. Candidates who entered before being directed would be logged as unauthorized. Candidates who opened packets would be disqualified. Candidates who claimed they were following someone else would need evidence. And evidence, this time, was walking right behind me. I stopped outside Hall E and looked at the door as if uncertain. Behind me, Seraphine stopped too, just out of sight around the corner. "Come on," I whispered, not to her, but to my old self, the girl who had trusted the wrong footsteps. Then I turned away from Hall E and continued toward the stairwell. That should have been enough. A normal person would have followed the person she was tailing, but Seraphine was not following me because she trusted me. She was following me because she wanted proof that I intended to go wrong. The moment I walked past the decoy door, she had a choice: keep tailing me to the real annex, or improve the trap by entering the wrong hall first and claiming I had tried the door before running. I reached the stairwell, pushed the door open, and let it swing slowly shut behind me. Through the narrowing gap, I saw her reflection move. She stepped out from the corner, looked toward the stairwell, then toward Hall E. Her face changed. Not much. Just enough. The golden softness drained, leaving calculation bare for one ugly second. She glanced at the camera, then lifted her hand to her hair, adjusting the white ribbon as if nervous. "Ilera," she called softly. "Is this the hall?" I did not answer. The stairwell door clicked shut between us, and I heard the Hall E handle turn. For the first time since waking up, I smiled. It was not a kind smile. I do not pretend it was. There are wounds that heal into wisdom, and there are wounds that heal into teeth. I climbed one flight to the second-floor annex, where a floor marshal in a navy vest stood beside a portable scanner. His name tag read Mr. Darren, and I remembered him from my first life because he had been the only adult in the investigation who looked uncomfortable while I cried. Not helpful, not brave, not willing to risk his position, but uncomfortable. Back then, I had hated him for it. Now I understood that discomfort could become useful if given evidence strong enough to make silence dangerous. "Candidate?" he asked. I handed him my admission slip and ID card. He scanned both. The device beeped green. "Ilera win. Group C. You're cutting it close." I took the alternate route from the briefing hall, I said, making sure my voice was steady and plain. The back exit was open. His eyes flicked up. "Who directed you?" "No one. The handbook allows it when main routing is compromised." That made him blink. Students were not supposed to know footnotes. "You read the handbook?" "Twice," I said. "Once too late." He frowned, but before he could ask what that meant, a sharp alarm chirped from the radio clipped to his vest. The second bell rang while his radio crackled. Downstairs, beyond the concrete walls, the whole building seemed to inhale. The assessment had officially begun. No candidate could enter the wrong hall now without it being a recorded breach. Mr. Darren pressed the radio. "Annex 2. A woman's voice snapped through static. "Unauthorized entry in Hall E. Candidate open packet. Possible group contamination. Need integrity officer." Mr. Darren's face tightened. He looked at me, then at the stairwell, then back at me. "Did anyone follow you?" In my first life, that question would have sounded like accusation. Now it sounded like the first hinge of a door opening. I did not rush to defend myself. I did not say Seraphine's name with hatred. I simply turned my head toward the security camera above the stairwell and said, "You should check the footage." A second chirp came through the radio. Candidate identified as Seraphine Vale. She states she followed Alara Wynn's route and believed Hall E was assigned. Mr. Darren went still. There are names that make adults careful. Seraphine's was one of them. Vale Family Donations had renovated the library, funded the debate wing, paid for half the scholarship gala. But there are also systems built to protect institutions from scandal by sacrificing students, and I had spent one lifetime learning how to make those systems afraid of sacrificing the wrong one. "I'm checked in at Hall C2, I said. "Before the deadline. On camera. With a green scan." Mr. Darren swallowed. "Go inside, Miss Wynn." Hall C2 was nothing like the hall where my first life ended. It was smaller, colder, with narrow windows facing the service courtyard and a row of desks spaced so far apart that each candidate looked stranded on her own island. Only 19 students were assigned there, most from other schools. No one looked at me like I was a joke or a warning. No one whispered that I was Seraphine's shadow. A proctor checked my pockets, examined my pens, glanced at my wrists, then directed me to seat 12 beside the window. On the desk lay a sealed packet with my candidate number printed in black. Not gold, not decorative, not special. Just mine. The sight of it hit harder than I expected. In my first life, the wrong packet had felt heavy because it carried my doom. This one felt heavy because it carried possibility. I sat down, placed both hands flat on the desk, and waited for them to stop shaking. The chief examiner entered at the front and began reading the instructions. Outside, somewhere below, radios crackled, doors opened, shoes hurried, and Seraphine's perfect morning began breaking apart behind walls thick enough to muffle her voice. I wanted to hear it. I will not lie. I wanted to hear her panic when she realized Hall E was a decoy, when she saw the ultraviolet void stamp glow under the integrity lamp, when she understood she had walked herself into the wrong hall without me. But the first question in my packet was already waiting, and revenge, if it was going to mean anything, could not be the only thing I did with my second life. The simulation was brutal. It was not the elegant academic challenge our teachers romanticized, but a grinding sequence of legal memos, evidence decisions, client interviews, and timed objections designed to expose anyone who had memorized leaked answers instead of understanding the work. In my first life, I never got to sit the real version. I only heard about it afterward from classmates who survived Seraphine's route by abandoning her at the main corridor and finding the annex on their own. They said the exam felt like being thrown into cold water with your hands tied. They said Seraphine had cried afterward from relief because she ranked first. I had imagined that exam for years, hated it for existing beyond the door I was barred from, and secretly wondered whether I would have failed anyway. Now, with the packet open before me and the clock chopping the morning into merciless pieces, I stopped wondering. I worked. I read facts until the words blurred, underlined contradictions, structured answers, rejected traps, corrected myself, breathed when panic rose, and kept moving. Twice, I thought of Seraphine downstairs. Once, I heard a muffled shout through the ventilation shaft, sharp enough that 3 candidates glanced up. The proctor said, "Eyes down," and I obeyed. It felt strange, almost disappointing, that survival required so much ordinary effort. There was no music swelling, no divine hand guiding my pen, just training, fear, and the stubborn refusal to let one stolen hallway define me twice. At the lunch break, we were not allowed to leave the annex. Integrity officers delivered sealed meal boxes and collected our phones in labeled envelopes. I sat by the window with a dry sandwich and listened to the other candidates trade cautious guesses about what had happened downstairs. Someone entered a practice suite. A boy from Ravencourt whispered, "My cousin volunteers here. He says the decoy packets have trace dye." A girl with silver glasses leaned closer. It was Seraphine Vale. The name moved through the room like cold air. Even students from other schools knew her. Merit Queen, debate champion, ethics essay winner, scholarship face on every brochure. The boy's eyes widened. "No way." "Way," the girl said. My marshal said she claimed another candidate led her there. I kept chewing.
Slowly, calmly.
The sandwich tasted like cardboard and victory, which, under the circumstances, was not the worst combination. Who? Someone asked. The girl shrugged. They didn't say. But apparently the footage shows she followed from behind and entered after the other candidate went upstairs. A laugh broke out, small and disbelieving. I looked out the window at the service courtyard where rain gathered in potholes, and for one impossible moment I saw my old self reflected in the glass. Thinner, older, eyes bruised by years of being disbelieved. She did not smile. She only watched, as if asking whether this was enough. Not yet, I thought. Not until the people who followed her, by choice, stopped pretending they had been carried. The afternoon portion was oral. That was where the institute liked to separate the prepared from the performed. One by one, we were called into a smaller room with 3 assessors and given a scenario to argue under pressure. My scenario involved a missing evidence file, an unreliable witness, and a judge who interrupted whenever I sounded too rehearsed. In my first life, I had spent years imagining myself brilliant in rooms I never entered. Reality was less flattering. My first answer tangled itself. My second came too fast. One assessor raised an eyebrow so high I wanted to crawl under the table. Then I remembered my father's hands at our kitchen sink the night before my scholarship interview, red from dish soap because he had worked a double shift and still washed my uniform himself. I remembered him saying, "If you get scared, slow down. People think fast is smart, but clear is kinder to your own mind." So I slowed down. I asked to restate. I conceded one weak point, defended a stronger one, and turned the missing file into a procedural objection instead of pretending it did not hurt me. By the time I left, my blouse was damp under the arms and my mouth tasted like metal, but the assessor who had raised her eyebrow nodded once. One nod. That was all. In my first life, I would have needed applause to believe I had not failed. This time, I accepted the nod like a receipt from the future. When the final bell released us, the annex doors opened onto a hallway crowded with rumors. Candidates from other halls poured into the central atrium, but the mood was wrong. Usually after a major assessment, the building filled with loud relief. Laughter too high, complaints too dramatic, friends comparing answers they were not supposed to discuss. That afternoon, the atrium buzzed with the quieter thrill of scandal. At the bottom of the stairs, 2 integrity officers stood beside a temporary barrier blocking the corridor to Hall E. Beyond them, I saw students from my original cohort lined against the wall, faces pale, admission slips in hand. Not all of them had followed Seraphine. Some must have gone through the main corridor and been redirected properly. Others had trailed her, maybe because they trusted her, maybe because they wanted the advantage they believed she carried, maybe because they simply feared being left behind. Their expressions shifted when they saw me descending from the annex with a completed candidate sticker on my lapel. Nella's mouth opened. Joran looked away. And Seraphine, standing between 2 officers near the Hall E doors, stared at me as if I had broken a law by surviving. She was still beautiful. That annoyed me more than it should have. Disaster had loosened one strand of hair from her ribbon and smudged the corner of her eyeliner, but she remained the kind of girl adults instinctively wanted to comfort. Her blazer was buttoned, her chin lifted, her hands clasped in front of her like she was enduring a misunderstanding with grace. In my first life, that posture had saved her. The committee saw dignity and mistook it for innocence. This time, dignity had to compete with cameras. "Elara," she called, loud enough for everyone to hear. Tell them you went toward Hall E first." There it was. The old trap, now desperate. A dozen faces turned toward me. Some frightened, some pleading, some already angry because my silence had stopped serving them. I walked to the bottom of the stairs and stopped behind the barrier, close enough to see Seraphine's pupils widen, far enough that no one could say I approached her. "I went to the annex stairwell," I said. My voice sounded ordinary. That was its power. "I did not enter Hall E." "You hesitated at the door," she snapped, the sweetness cracking. "You made it look like what?" I asked. The question fell cleanly between us. Her lips parted, then closed. She could not say, "You made it look like bait, and I chose to swallow it." She could not say, "I followed you because I needed you to be wrong first." She could not say, "I entered a hall I was not assigned because I wanted a story strong enough to bury you again." So she said the only thing left. I was confused. The integrity officer beside her was a narrow woman with iron gray hair and a tablet tucked under one arm. "Candidates are not disciplined for confusion," she said. "They are disciplined for unauthorized entry, opening sealed materials, and making false statements during an integrity inquiry." The atrium quieted. Seraphine's classmates stopped whispering. The officer tapped her tablet. "Candidate Vale, your first statement claimed Miss when led you into Hall E. Footage shows Miss when past the Hall E door, entered the annex stairwell, scanned into Hall C2, and remained there. Footage then shows you waiting until the stairwell door shut before entering Hall E alone. Your second statement claimed multiple candidates were directed by a marshal. There was no marshal in that corridor. Your third statement claimed the packet on the desk bore your candidate number. It did not. It was a practice packet stamped void." Seraphine's face had gone very still. That was the expression I remembered from the hearing in my first life, the moment before she cried on command. "I panicked," she whispered. "I thought the hall had changed." The officer did not soften. "The hall did change. To the annex. You were informed by your admission slip and by the floor marshals. Instead, you entered an unassigned room and handled sealed material." "But I didn't use it," Seraphine said quickly. "I didn't write anything. I didn't gain an advantage." "That will be determined by the committee." The officer's gaze moved to the students lined against the wall, and by the access logs from the leaked route chart found on your device. That was the pattern interruption even I had not expected. In my old life, I knew Seraphine had intercepted the reroute message somehow, but I never learned how. The room seemed to tilt as every student processed the officer's words. Leaked route chart.
Device.
Access logs. Seraphine's perfect mask did not crack this time. It shattered. "My device," she said. "You searched my phone? You consented to device inspection when you signed the candidate integrity agreement," the officer replied. "All candidates did." Joran, who had defended Seraphine louder than anyone all year, stared at her with dawning horror. "You had the route chart," he whispered. Seraphine turned on him so fast the white ribbon whipped across her shoulder. "Don't be stupid. Everyone tries to check routes." "You told us Hall D," Nella said, voice shaking. "You said you checked before they covered it." Seraphine's eyes flashed. "Because I was trying to help." "No," I said, and the word came out before I planned it. Everyone looked at me again. I should have stayed silent. Silence was safer. But old ghosts crowded behind my teeth, and this time I knew how to speak without bleeding. Helping would have been telling a marshal the chart was leaked. Helping would have been following your own admission slip. Helping would have been letting people choose instead of making certainty sound like kindness. Seraphine's face twisted. "You think you're better because you got lucky?"
"No," I said.
"I think I got careful." They separated us after that. The Institute loved procedure once procedure protected the Institute. I was taken to a side office with frosted glass and a pot plant dying in the corner, where an assistant dean asked me to give a statement. In my first life, statements had been traps because every word I said was treated like proof of instability. This time, I kept mine short, factual, almost boring. I described leaving the briefing hall through the back exit. I described noticing Seraphine behind me in the trophy case reflection. I described passing Hall E and entering the annex stairwell. I did not call her jealous. I did not mention my previous life, because even in a world generous enough to return me, no committee wanted metaphysics in an incident report. The assistant dean asked why I used the back exit when the deputy registrar said main corridor only. I slid the handbook across the desk, open to page 42. I had printed it the night before, highlighted the footnote, and tucked it into my folder like a quiet blade. He read the line twice. His expression curdled. Most candidates would not know this. Most candidates did not lose everything by trusting verbal instructions over written rules, I said. He looked up. I looked back. For a moment, The office held more truth than either of us could officially record. Then he cleared his throat and asked me to sign the bottom of my statement. By evening, the story had mutated into 10 versions. In one, I had tricked Seraphine with a fake note. In another, she had been framed by jealous scholarship students. In a third, half the cohort had been dragged out crying after opening voided packets in Hall E, which was not true, though enough had been detained for the rumor to survive. My phone filled with messages as soon as devices were returned. Nella sent 12 apologies in a row, each one longer than the last. Joran sent, "Did you know she had the route?" Then, "I'm sorry." Then, "Are you going to tell them we followed because we trusted her?" I stared at that one for a long time. In my first life, the class had trusted Seraphine because trusting her was profitable. She shared selective tips, invited the right people to study sessions, smiled at teachers, collected loyalty like spare pens. They trusted me only when they needed notes, explanations, or someone to blame. I typed, "Tell them yourselves," then put my phone face down. That was one of the hardest mercies I ever gave myself, refusing to carry other people's confessions just because they had arrived late. The emergency committee convened the next morning. Saint Aurelia moved slowly when students complained of bullying, illness, or unfair grading, but when a public assessment was threatened, administrators developed the speed of predators. I was called not as an accused candidate, but as a witness, a distinction so beautiful I almost did not trust it. The hearing room overlooked the courtyard, where maintenance workers were removing temporary signs from the assessment route. Seraphine sat at the opposite table between her father and a lawyer with silver cufflinks. Her mother was crying softly into a tissue, the kind of crying designed to remind people that consequences harmed families too. My father sat beside me in his only suit, shoulders stiff, hands folded so tightly his knuckles looked carved. He had not asked many questions when I called him the night before. He only said, "Do I need to come?" I said yes. He said, "Then I'm coming." In my first life, he had come after the damage was done, after the institute had already branded me a cheat, after relatives had already started advising him to distance himself from my disgrace. This time, he sat beside me before the verdict, and that changed the shape of the room. The evidence was worse for Seraphine than I expected. The leaked route chart had been accessed from a restricted administrator portal using credentials belonging to a junior volunteer, a boy from her debate club. The file had been opened on her tablet at 8:41 a.m., 12 minutes before the briefing ended. A screenshot was deleted at 8:49 and recovered by the device audit. At 8:52, she sent a message to a private group chat. "Main crowd gets sent front. Annex route for selected only. Keep Alara close." That line landed so heavily that even her lawyer stopped tapping his pen. Keep Alara close. There are 4 words that can exhume a dead life. I felt my father turn toward me, not fully, just enough for me to sense the question he would not ask in public. Seraphine's father whispered urgently to the lawyer. Seraphine stared at the table. The integrity chair read the message again, voice flat. "Candidate Vale, please explain." Seraphine lifted her chin, and for one wild second I thought she would attempt another performance. Instead, she looked at me with something raw and almost honest. Hatred, yes, but fear underneath it. "She always acts like she's helpless," she said. "Everyone thinks she's innocent because she's quiet. I just wanted to make sure she didn't take a special route and leave the rest of us behind." The chair folded her hands. "So, you followed her to prevent unfair advantage?" "Yes. By using a leaked restricted route chart." Seraphine said nothing. The committee decision took 23 minutes. I counted everyone by the second hand on the wall clock because trauma makes accountants of us all. When they returned, the integrity chair did not look at Seraphine first. She looked at the whole room, which was how I knew the institute had chosen survival over donation money. Candidate Alara, Wynne is cleared of wrongdoing. Her assessment remains valid. My father exhaled so sharply it sounded like pain. I kept my hands in my lap and pressed my nails into my palms, not because I was unhappy, but because joy can be dangerous when it arrives in a body trained for punishment. The chair continued. Candidate Seraphine Vale is found to have accessed restricted routing information entered an unauthorized assessment room, handled voided materials, and provided false statements during an active integrity inquiry. Her assessment is voided. Pending final ratification, she is suspended from all institute merit consideration and barred from retesting this cycle. Seraphine's mother made a small broken sound. Seraphine did not cry. I think she understood tears would no longer translate. Then the chair turned to the second page. Students who followed candidate Vale into Hall E and handle materials will be reviewed individually. Students found to have knowingly relied on restricted information will be disqualified. Students who remained outside and reported confusion will be reassigned to a makeup sitting. The room shifted again. Not everyone would be destroyed. That mattered. Revenge that burns every bystander may feel grand in stories, but in real life it smells too much like the people who hurt you. After the hearing, Seraphine caught me near the stairwell. Not alone. She was too watched for that now. Her lawyer stood near the exit. Her father argued with the dean, and my father had gone to sign something at the reception desk. Still, she found 3 seconds and used them like a needle. You planned it, she said. Her voice was low, stripped of honey. You knew I'd follow. I looked at her, really looked. In my first life, she had grown larger than human in my mind, a golden monster with teachers in her pocket and fate kneeling at her feet. Up close, after consequences, she was just a girl with a ribbon too tight around her hair and panic making her skin look gray. That did not make her harmless. It made her smaller than my fear had allowed. I knew you might, I said. That's not the same. Her mouth trembled with anger. You ruined me. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the old script had survived even when the actors changed places. No, I said. I left through a door. You chose the room. For a second, I thought she might slap me. Her fingers twitched. Then the lawyer called her name, sharp with warning, and Seraphine stepped back into the life she had made for herself. The results came out 3 weeks later on a gray morning that smelled like wet leaves and printer toner. I did not stand under the public board waiting to be judged by a crowd. That was something the old Alara would have done, desperate to witness proof that she deserved to exist. Instead, I opened the candidate portal at the kitchen table while my father made toast badly and pretended not to watch. The page loaded slowly. My hands stayed still. Candidate 1187. Passed.
Ranking 14.
Merit consideration. Eligible. For a moment, I could not understand the words. 14th was not first. It was not cinematic. It would not make anyone gasp or drop a teacup or beg forgiveness in the rain. It was, however, mine. Earned in the correct hall, under my own name, with my own hands. My father read over my shoulder and made a sound I had never heard from him before. Half laugh, half sob. Then he put one burnt piece of toast on my plate like an offering and said, 14th is good. I looked at the screen until the letters blurred. 14th is real, I said. The institute did not erase Seraphine completely. Institutions rarely erase people with rich fathers. They archive them in polite language. The official notice said her assessment was invalidated due to integrity violations and that she had withdrawn from public merit consideration. Unofficially, everyone knew she had been barred from the cycle and that the Vale family donation to the new library wing had been postponed. The students who knowingly used her leaked route were disqualified. The ones who followed out of panic but never entered Hall E sat a makeup assessment under supervision, so strict it was practically a prison visit.
Nella past.
Joran did not. He sent me one final message weeks later. I should have trusted myself instead of her. I did not answer, but I hoped he meant it. Not for my sake. For his. There are people who betray you because they are evil, and people who betray you because belonging feels warmer than courage. The second kind can still ruin your life. The difference is that afterward, they might learn to stop standing in crowds that move too easily. As for me, I stopped walking behind golden girls. That sounds simple, almost childish, but it became the foundation of everything. At the institute, I chose seats near exits. I read footnotes. I saved emails. I made friends slowly, with people who corrected me when I was wrong and did not treat my help like rent owed for their approval. When younger students asked how I passed after the Hall E scandal, I did not tell them the whole truth. I did not say I had died once because I followed a white ribbon into the wrong room. I said, read your own admission slip. Know the rules in writing. And never let someone else's confidence replace your eyes. They usually laughed, thinking I was being dramatic. That was fine. Warnings are seeds. They do not have to bloom in front of you to matter. Years later, on the morning I received my first appointment letter, I walked past the old auditorium and saw that the emergency exit sign had been replaced. The new one was brighter, cleaner, no dead insect trapped inside, no flicker in the corner. The back door was propped open while maintenance workers carried chairs through the corridor. Students hurried by with coffee, phones, and anxious faces, already building the mistakes they would one day call youth. I stood there longer than I meant to, remembering the girl I had been. The one who followed, the one who fell, the one who came back with enough fear to become careful. Then I stepped through the back exit, not because I was running, not because I was setting a trap, but because it led exactly where I wanted to go. Outside, the service courtyard was washed clean from rain. My shoes splashed through a shallow puddle, and for once, no one was ahead of me to follow.